Welcome back to our community. Susie Thomas visiting with Dr. Mike Polnick. He is the Director of Operations at Pregnancy Choices, but we're talking to him today because he hosts a podcast called Orthodoxy and Bioethics. You've got an interesting background yourself. Let's just take this time to get to know you, Mike.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit more about you.
Sure. So I always kind of begin these stories in my class with my grandpa, because my grandpa very much shaped who I am, as all my grandparents did. So my grandfather, this is the first time his story's ever been told outside of a couple of people, so I'm kind of proud of this.
Wow.
His name's Joseph Polnick, and he was from the area of Poland that became Russia after World War II and is now Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And Grandpa was captured by the Nazis in Poland. And
He was
in the military.
Oh, was he Jewish or was he?
No, he was Catholic.
He was Catholic.
He was just arrested. He was a soldier, and because he was a big guy, he got put in a work camp.
Oh man!
With a gentleman by the name of Wojek. And during night, that's how my grandpa learned how to polka. So the family story goes, right from my grandpa to my grandmother, my babci, which is Polish for grandma, to us is Christmas Eve. They were working on a road, and they had a feeling that the German soldiers were going to drink a little bit. And they ended up drinking a lot, and my grandpa and Wojek were able to escape, shackled to each other.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Not too many people can say they escaped from that.
No. And
my word.
And then they ended up getting arrested. They got caught and deported. They got sent to France, and then the war was over. So my grandfather found himself in the south of France, and he met this beautiful woman named Sabina, who was my grandmother.
Wow.
And she had Polish heritage. So they lived there for, I want to say 10, 15 years. They had my Aunt Mireille, and my father was born in France, and he remembers going to school there and all these stories. And then they moved to New Britain, Connecticut. And Grandpa was here. He was a stonemason, and he was in Connecticut for, I think, a week or two, and he got a stone in his eye, and he couldn't work, and they didn't speak English. So in New Britain, there was a Fafner Bearing Company, and my grandmother walked 3 miles every day to apply for a job. And according to the legend, the guy said, "If we hire you, will you stop showing up?" Because she just annoyed him so much. And Grandma goes, "Yeah."
That's good work if you can get it.
Yeah. So he just, she got a job there, worked for like 50 years, and my grandpa worked there. And New Britain's New Britain's a very heavy Polish town. It still is. Mm-hmm. My grandpa met a guy by the name of Cardinal Wojtyła when he came through, who ended up becoming Pope John Paul II.
Oh my!
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Because my grandpa was the head of the Polish Veterans Club there.
Wow.
So my father, was raised in a very ethnic area, went to Catholic school and so on. Dad went to Vietnam as a Marine and got out and was at a dance club, and he met a blonde woman by the name of Martha. And my mom's story is also kind of fun. My aunt has traced our heritage all the way back, I don't know, to essentially the pre-Civil War.
Yes.
So I have documentation of all this. Like, she's in the Daughters of the American Revolution.
She's in DAR.
Right, which apparently is really great.
Oh, it is.
When my aunt told me, I was like, I don't know what to say.
We just had them on right here.
Okay, well, there you go. So they are great. I found out later, but I was like 16 when I found out. I didn't know what it was. My great-grandmother was a school teacher in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. My great-grandfather went to Goshen Business College in Indiana. And my grandmother's side was in Massillon for like 5 generations at St. Joe's.
Oh, neat.
So
yes.
my grandma went to Mount Marie, which was central back then. And Grandpa worked for Republic. And then they moved to Connecticut, and that's how my mom met my dad.
Oh, how neat.
Yeah.
So how'd we get you back here?
Yeah. So I was raised in a little town called Portland, Connecticut. I went to a little Methodist church with a red door and 3 steps. And 40 kids in a grade, really small. My parents had split when I was young, and then my grandfather, who we were living with, passed away, and my grandmother wanted to come back to Ohio. So
now I have to ask, may I interrupt
Sure,
a second?
sure.
Was that the grandfather who had escaped from the Nazis?
No, it was my mother's grandfather.
Okay.
My mother's father, I apologize. Yeah, we had moved in with them after the divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Grandpa passed away, my mom moved back home because she's from here. And I've been here ever since. Went to Jackson, so you can imagine what a challenge that might have been, going from a little, school with 4 teachers in a grade to Jackson. They had more in a grade than we had almost in our whole school system. I walked in, I'd never seen that many people in my life.
So you're a polar bear.
Yeah.
Well, congrats on those 2 state
Thank you.
championships this year.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So, and then what interested you into going this direction, Mike?
Mm-hmm. So moving to Jackson was a challenge for me, to say the least. I didn't have the kind of the resources a lot of the quote Jackson kids would traditionally have, and I didn't fit in very well. It was hard for me to fit in. I came from a small school. I didn't understand the larger contexts. I didn't make a lot of friends, and there were some just logical differences. Like I wrote cursive in Connecticut, and I was the only one in my grade at the time that was writing in cursive, so I had to learn how to write in block letters.
Yeah.
And all these kind of things. And what happened was, as I became kind of isolated in Jackson, I took a placement test. And I wrote high on the placement test, and they didn't notice that I did that. So they ended up, thinking, I'm not, maybe I'm a little slower and I need remedial help. So
little did they know.
Well, so there was a lot of things that happened then, and being a kid with a single mom, I had a lot of challenges. Mm-hmm. We can call them opportunities for growth.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little rowdy, and what happened was I tried to understand Christianity because I didn't understand how I was going through the struggles I was and how so many of my friends were too. And it was funny because I was the last class to go through welding in Jackson.
Oh, yes.
And some of the teachers were afraid of us vocational kids, and we were laughing. We're like, we can't get in trouble because we're going to work on Friday nights. Like I would drive up and weld in Portage Lakes after school.
Wow.
So I would lay in my front yard and try to understand.
What was it, Mike, about Christianity that was compelling to you?
I think it was when I went through a lot of depression when I was younger. And Christianity was the religion where the person actually walked through difficult things with me. And I said, this is a guy that I can understand because he's been through it. He wasn't, raised a prince like Siddhartha Gautama and, was isolated and then did his journey, or it wasn't, any of the other, it wasn't Confucius, it wasn't Lao Tzu.
Can't visit a tomb that's got anyone buried in it.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And it was the fact that he entered into the world and he walked with us. Mm-hmm. And that's how I tried to discover my life. And what I realized was that we all have these opportunities. And as a bishop explained it to me later, Bishop John Michael Botein, there's a Byzantine Catholic bishop in Canton. My son's actually named after him.
Yes, neat.
You get these moments where you make these decisions. And what you don't realize is that in moments of faith, they're microcosms. And God is the one that will take those little moments of grace and turn them into something larger. And we don't see it. We don't understand it. But in every moment, you make a conscious decision to live correctly. So for me, Christianity became a way to give my life meaning because life was meaningless for me at the time. And then I found out that Christians did engage in science. And one of the greatest things I learned was I was not the first person to think of all the questions that I had. I had this feeling, I'm going to stump them on this one. And then I look and I'm like, St. Augustine thought of that, or St. Thomas Aquinas or Bonaventure or, any of the fathers of the church or mothers of the church. And then that allowed me to realize that these were real people that struggled. And the more I got into the humanity behind the thinkers in the church, you felt comfortable because you're like, okay, we're all falling short of where we want to be.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So you take all this package and you bring it to Pregnancy Choices.
Yeah.
Tell us about your experience there thus far and your dreams for the future.
Yeah. So with Pregnancy Choices, it was something where I wanted to take my education and my experience and do something with it. And Pregnancy Choices is giving me the opportunity to do that. And what I'm finding is that my particular skill set in policy and in being rather analytical is helpful. Not that they didn't have that before, but I enjoy entering into the ministry. I enjoy learning from Jill. I enjoy working with the people. I mean, I tell my kids, I literally work with the greatest people I've ever met. You know, no offense to the other people I've known. They're all wonderful too. But when you can go to work and walk around people and you know that they're good folks,
yes,
it makes everything easier.
How about your orthodoxy and bioethics? What can we look forward to as far as future topics that you're going to tackle?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm going to be working on is the spirituality and the mysticism of orthodoxy, of understanding that medical ethics is not something that you do. I once wrote an article that said that ethics is an art. And if art is the external of the internal person, then your ethical behavior ought to be a reflection of who you are on the inside. So for me, the more we enter into prayer, the more we enter into contemplation with God and the mystical relationship that we have with Christ, the more those ethical decisions become a lifestyle. Because my fear is always that bioethics becomes something that you, quote, do, and not something that you are. So I think that there should be a synergy with that process. And that once you pray and you enter into the life of Christ, these things kind of almost become evidence to you. And at the same time, as I work in a field that is, I wouldn't say hostile to Christianity, but certainly you need to know their language.
Sure.
You're scrutinized. There was actually a study once that said ethics professors are held to a higher moral standard than any other ethics professor.
Isn't that interesting? Sure.
Yeah. And what I learned was the behavior of a medical ethicist is always under evaluation by the hospitals. Just like, you know, when I teach my kids something, how I've behaved is going to give me cred, so to speak.
Street cred.
Street cred, yeah. Luckily, I don't think my kids know what that is yet. They better not. They're 10 and 7. But yeah, I would be remiss if I have twin boys, Alexander and John Michael, and then a daughter who is perfect, and her name is Raisa, and she's 7.
Oh.
And she is.
So beautiful. So beautiful. Well, we look forward to that. How do we find Orthodoxy and Bioethics?
iTunes. Just search,
iTunes.
Yep, or if
All
you
right.
search my name on Google, it comes up pretty quick.
Dr. Mike Polnick. There are not too many of them.
I believe I am the only one.
That's pretty cool.
Good or bad.
And isn't it interesting that we as humans, we think it all the way through, think roundabout, and we come back to how Scripture says it so easily, pray about everything. It's, it always focuses it down where it says it best, and it said it first.
Yep, absolutely.
So cool. Dr. Mike Polnick, thank you so much for what you bring to our community.
Thank you very much.